And welcome everybody to another edition of the GSMC Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. As always, I'm your host Kenneth Grunfelder, and it's great to have you guys here on this Wednesday, August 21st. We have a lot to talk about on the show today. Before I get into that, just want to remind you guys, as always, to tip or donate, get your comments recognized. Make sure to hit the $ icon in the chat. We qualified for super chats, so your comment will be highlighted in the live broadcast. I will acknowledge it, and it just makes the show more lively between me and you guys, the viewers. And the alternative way to help out the show as well is also going to the link GSMCPodcast.net. And like I said, like I've been saying, we appreciate your guys' viewership each and every day as we continue to put out content for you guys daily. So let's get into what we are going to discuss for today. So we are going to start off the show. We're going to talk about Brian Flores' response to Tua's comments. I know I went over that yesterday, and Brian Flores did have some comments on that, so I wanted to get into what he had to say. Then we'll talk about Tom Brady, talking about the development of young quarterbacks and his thoughts on that. We'll get into Arthur Smith, the offensive coordinator of the Steelers, get into some of his comments on why people shouldn't overreact to what they've been seeing in the preseason so far. We'll talk about the Chiefs. We'll talk about the not the no-look pass, but the behind-the-back pass that Mahomes had in this past preseason game against the Lions, and Andy Reid's reaction to that. And then we will continue with our second-to-last wide receiver group rankings. Today we will be covering the AFC South. So make sure to stick around for that at the end of the show. So let's get into the first topic, which is talking about Brian Flores and his comments on what Tua said about him. And of course, like I said, I covered that yesterday. So Tua's comments were pretty rough for Flores. And this is what he had to say on what Tua said. And he said, "Look, I'm human. That hit me in a way that I wouldn't say was positive. I've got to use that and say, how can I grow from that? How can I be better?" He also said, "I'm genuinely happy for his success. I wish Tua nothing but the best. Right now I'm focused on the 2024 Vikings." Because he did take over as the defensive coordinator for the Vikings last year. And the Vikings defense actually improved, because if you remember from 2022, they were not good. And their defense was really bad, and you get to the playoffs against the Giants, and Daniel Jones torched that defense. So, and that was kind of the reason why they lost. I mean, they had a really good offense that year, but the defense was not good. And Flores did a nice job last year for the Vikings. So, and he's going to have to do a really good job this year, too, if the Vikings are going to want to have any kind of a season, especially now with J.J. McCarthy being out. And Sam Darnold is going to be the starter moving forward. And yeah, so that's what he said on Tua. And there was also some other comments in the article I have here on even Mac Jones. Michael Lombardi said, "I don't think Brian Flores was shy about telling Tua, hey, I should have picked Mac Jones. I don't think he was shy about telling him that. In fact, I know that he wasn't." And he said that on the GM Shuffle podcast. And he also said, "If I had knew you were going to be this bad, I would have picked Mac Jones." That's supposedly what he told the young quarterback. But, yeah, so, and I talked about this yesterday during that segment when I was going over it, is that coaches are going to have to, coaches got to learn to adapt. And at least in the press conference, Brian Flores is acknowledging that, maybe I could have did things differently. I'm going to learn from it. And that shows that, hey, I could take accountability when something like this comes up. And it was just a way to try to motivate Tua. That's how we got to look at it. I don't I don't like to think that he did believe this with what he was saying. Now, if he really did believe it, he's probably going to keep that to himself. But yeah, it's like I said yesterday. Players are going to respond differently, and we also did talk about it in the production meeting as well that each player is going to be different. Each player has a different way of being coached. They'll respond differently. So you have to learn to coach players certain ways and other players different ways. And Brian Flores is one of those coaches that he would coach every player the same way. And that's why when I went over it yesterday, Tua said that there were other players that kind of were in the same boat as him with Brian Flores' coaching style. And that they didn't respond well to it. They believed what he was saying. When in reality, he really didn't believe it. He's just trying to get the most out of his players. So, and in the quotes, it seems like he realizes his wrongdoings and he's going to learn from that. And we'll see, if he ever gets another head coaching job because, obviously, he spent some time with the Steelers and now he's with the Vikings on their staff. So, who knows if he gets another coaching job because I know, there was, that tenure in Miami didn't end well. So we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, it just it is interesting that whole situation, and how it is now with Miami. Mike McDaniel's got a different philosophy, and Tua has benefited from that. And Tua has looked like a different player, has played better. Now, part of that is because of the personnel that he is surrounded by, but, it is reassuring for him that he's got a head coach that truly believes in him. Not to say that Brian Flores didn't believe in him, but to Tua, it didn't seem like he showed that with some of the things that were said towards him. So it is interesting, and I know I brought up Tom Brady yesterday, and how any kind of motivation would fuel him, or any reason to have a chip on his shoulder, he would he would take advantage of that. If the coach tells him that they don't believe in him, he's going to want to prove him wrong. And that's what he did for 20 plus years. But players respond differently. And Brian Flores is part of a coaching tree that hasn't really been that successful. And, you look around, all these guys that have been head coaches, Josh McDaniels, Bill O'Brien, Joe Judge, Matt Patricia. I mean, it's all kind of ended the same way. They get their opportunities, but what if any of those teams really won that have been coached by those teams? Or coaches have been a part of those teams. I mean, Bill O'Brien had some good years in Houston. Made the playoffs a lot. He was probably the best one. But didn't amount to anything. He was a part of a 24-0 collapse against the Chiefs, and then the following year that offseason, he trades one of the best receivers in the NFL at the time for a running back that had some really good years, first couple of years in the league, but was not the same player. And that kind of and then Houston fell apart. So you would think the Belichick coaching tree would be one of the best, but it's not really that great. And unfortunately, Brian Flores is a part of that. So, but that's as a head coach. Like some of these guys can be good coordinators. I mean, Josh McDaniels, for example. Josh McDaniels, I don't think is a bad offensive coordinator. Because look, I know he had Tom Brady, but that first year with Mac Jones wasn't bad. You know, Brian Flores, what he was able to do with the Vikings defense last year, they played better. So, like, as coordinators, some of these guys aren't that bad. Now, Matt Patricia with the Eagles defense, he didn't really help. But, like I said, some of these guys as coordinators, they that's their spot. That's their role. Like maybe head coach isn't for them. Now, obviously, if they have the opportunity, they're going to take it. Like if Brian Flores gets another opportunity to be a head coach and it's the right situation, then maybe he takes that. And, he takes on a new philosophy and doesn't have that same approach that he had when he was with the Dolphins. There was a lot that went on over there in Miami. You had the tampering stuff. It's just there was a lot going on over there during his time. So we'll see if he ever gets another opportunity. Right now, it doesn't seem like it, but had some interesting comments that I wanted to touch upon. So let me know what you guys think about what Brian Flores had to say. And with that, we are going to take our first break of the show. And then when we come back, we'll talk about Tom Brady, talking about the development of young quarterbacks and, just his opinion on it. And I'll give you my opinion on what he had to say. So with that being said, stick around. And we'll be right back here on the GSMC Football Podcast.